let's look at the phenomena of the Navi, the prophets, and the beginning of this prophetic intensification that runs from Samuel all the way to the ascension of Christ. And Camden, this is where I think it gets fascinating.
Right.
He starts by saying we need to note that there's a very, if you look at the bottom of page 203, this is where, and I think this is very interesting. This is where Voss notes something really critical to appreciate when it comes to what's happening in the history of special revelation on the one hand, and what's happening in a pagan culture surrounding that history on the other hand. And here's what it is. It's very tempting on this critical theory to find some historical point of almost perfect overlap between pagan practices of Baalite prophets, the prophets of Baal, who cut themselves and act ecstatically on the one side, and these bands of prophets who are viewed as fanatical or showing the same empirical manifestations on the other side. Voss says it's really easy to look at that and say, this looks so similar. I don't think there's any real substantial difference. But here's what Voss says, and this is where it starts to get so interesting. What are the prophets about? Now, let's say this over against all critical theories. What are the prophets themselves fundamentally about? About maintaining the absolute antithesis between the religion of Jehovah and the religion of idols. It's just that basic. Voss says down on the bottom, he says, we've always got this danger toward the bottom of page 203 of losing sight of the great difference between the true religion and the pagan religions surrounding that true religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever we say here about the manifestation of these appearances that accompany these prophets, it's not the physical or verbal excitation per se that ought to occupy our primary attention. It's the true religion that they proclaim in covenantal fellowship with the triune God and seeking his glory, his kingdom, and his name. See, Voss is going to tell us whatever else you're going to say about these prophets, you have to look at the nature of their true religion over against what was happening in Canaan. In fact, I could put it this way. Think of the true religion and what's on either side of it. You've got Egypt on one side when you're coming out into the land of Canaan, and then you've got Canaanites on the other side, on the near side. So far side Egypt, near side Canaan. What unites them? Idolatry. What unites them? Paganism. What unites them? Whole-souled opposition to the self-revealing God who in the glory cloud dwells with his people in a bond of communion. They're fundamentally opposed to that. So if you're dealing with the magicians of Pharaoh or the prophets of Baal, whatever kind of mystical expressions that they have in their idolatry, however those correspond to any excitations that you see coming from the Navi, that's formal only. And Voss is saying, within that formal similarity, when you cut down to the core of it, there's an absolute religious antithesis between the worship of the true and living God and what is transacted either in Egypt or Canaan. And Voss says, if you lose sight of that and you go the way of the critics, what do? You blur that antithesis. You blur the deepest religious antithesis presented in the scriptures between the worship of the true and living God, which is what the Navi direct you to, and the idolatry of either Egypt or Canaan on either side. And so it's really important that we remember this, because if you don't, and you don't have a history of special revelation that focuses on the glory and worship of the triune God, what do you have instead? You have instead a history of religions model that views all of these religious expressions in the ancient Near East of a common religious peace.
Right.
only difference is that you've got some different polemical point of view with regard to Israel that you might not have in Egypt, you might not have in Canaan. But really, religiously,
Hmm.
they're all one.